I always imagined I would spend some time in an isolated place, but I never thought it would be after a divorce. Renting a cabin in the mountains was an impulsive decision, almost as if my mind needed an urgent escape. The idea was to get away from the city, the noise, and the pressure of everyday life. I just wanted silence, time to think, and if possible, to pull my life back together. I thought that being away from everything would give me the clarity I had been desperately searching for. The cabin was simple, but it had a peculiar charm. It was remote, with no neighbors in sight, and that was exactly what I needed. The thought of being far from everything gave me a sense of freedom. However, there was something slightly unsettling about the place. There was no phone signal, which at first bothered me, but soon I realized it could be a relief. No messages, no calls. Just me and the vastness of nature. The isolation felt heavy, but strangely comforting at the same time. That first night, after settling in and lighting a fire in the fireplace, I started to feel more at ease. I really needed this time alone to forget the chaos of the past few months. It was then that I heard a sound on the floor. I thought it was just the wind, or maybe some animal outside, but the noise came from inside the cabin, as though someone had slid something under the door. I got up quickly, but when I checked, there was nothing there. It was only when I looked again that I noticed something strange. A small piece of paper had been pushed under the door. There was no one there, and the sound had stopped. I assumed it was just a prank, perhaps some local who thought it would be funny to scare me. Who else would be around here? The cabin was in the middle of nowhere. The message written on the paper was simple and to the point. You're not alone. I couldn't help but laugh. Maybe some neighbor had a strange sense of humor. Still, my heart started to race a little, and for a moment, I felt a strange chill run through me. But I quickly brushed off the thought. I was alone, and there was no way it could be anything more than a joke. I decided to go to bed, and eventually, the unease faded as I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the sunlight flooded the cabin, casting a warm glow on everything. I woke up feeling slightly more at peace, but something still felt off. I decided to spend the day exploring the area around the cabin. The mountains were breathtaking, and the sound of the stream nearby had a calming effect. The longer I stayed outside, the more relaxed I felt. Nature seemed to do what I had hoped. It cleared my mind, even if just for a moment. But when I returned to the cabin later, something caught my attention that sent a shiver down my spine. The door to the cabin was ajar. I could have sworn I had closed it before I left. I stood there, frozen, for a few moments, just staring at it. It wasn't wide open, but it was enough to make me question whether I had done it myself. Maybe the wind had pushed it open? I walked over cautiously, and when I stepped inside, I immediately felt that something was wrong. It wasn't just the door being open. There was something else in the air. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't hear anything unusual, but it was like the whole place felt different. I had been alone here for hours, and yet, for some reason, the silence now seemed oppressive. I checked everything. Nothing was out of place, but there was still an odd sensation that I couldn't shake. I thought maybe I was just overthinking it, that the stress of everything back home was finally catching up to me. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I wasn't truly alone. That evening, as the sun set and the shadows grew longer, I decided to make myself a hot meal and settle in for the night. It was quiet, too quiet, and I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. The fire crackled, but the air felt heavy, like something, or someone, was just beyond the edge of my perception. After a while, I began to convince myself that I was simply being paranoid. After all, who would be out here in the middle of nowhere? And yet, despite all my reasoning, the unease wouldn't go away. The next few days passed slowly, but with a sense of growing discomfort that I couldn't ignore. It was subtle at first, small things that didn't make sense, things that I might have just missed in my first rush of settling in. The cabin felt the same, but my sense of reality began to slip. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something was off. One morning, I woke up to find that the chair I had left by the fireplace the night before was now positioned in front of the window, facing out. I never touched it before going to bed, and I couldn't fathom how it had moved. The window had a view of nothing but trees, so why would anyone bother to move the chair there? The thought of a draft pushing it across the floor seemed far-fetched. I tried to shake it off, thinking I must have done it in my sleep, but it didn't sit right with me. I set about my day, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Every time I turned around, I felt like something, or someone, was just out of my line of sight. The unease was growing, but I kept telling myself that I was simply tired and stressed. Still, there was no denying that the atmosphere in the cabin had changed since the first night. It wasn't the place I had once thought would bring peace. It felt different, like it was no longer just mine. At night, I made a habit of checking the doors and windows, always locking them before going to bed. One evening, after eating dinner, I made sure the front door was tightly shut, just as I always did. Yet, when I woke up the next morning, it was slightly ajar again. Not wide open, but definitely enough for me to notice. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, staring at it. Was I losing my mind? Was I sleepwalking and forgetting to lock the door? It didn't seem likely, but the possibility made my skin crawl. As the days wore on, more odd things started to happen. I would find objects out of place, my jacket on the wrong hook, my shoes turned the opposite direction. The strangest thing was that nothing ever seemed to be missing. It wasn't like someone was stealing from me. It was as if they were just moving things around. The sense of intrusion grew stronger each time. The thought that I wasn't alone in the cabin began to feel more like a terrifying reality than a ridiculous notion. One night, after locking everything up for bed, I decided to try something. I set up my phone on a shelf across the room, pointing it toward the door. I figured that if anything odd happened, I'd at least have some proof. Maybe I could prove that I wasn't losing my mind, that something really was going on. But even as I set the camera up, part of me felt silly. Why would anyone be sneaking into my cabin? Who would bother? The area was so remote, and I hadn't seen a single soul since I arrived. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep. The minutes ticked by slowly, and every creak of the cabin seemed amplified in the stillness. At some point, I drifted off, but it wasn't a peaceful sleep. I woke up several times, feeling the familiar sense of someone watching me, though I couldn't see anyone. Each time, I convinced myself it was just my overactive imagination. After all, I was alone in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else around. The next morning, I checked the footage on my phone. I felt a pit in my stomach as I scrubbed through the video, watching it frame by frame. At first, it seemed like nothing, just me sleeping soundly. But then at one point I saw it, a shadow in the doorway. The figure stood there, motionless, watching me as I slept. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. I replayed the footage over and over, but it was always the same. Someone had been standing in my doorway, watching me sleep. I immediately checked the door. It was locked, just as I had left it. My hands were trembling as I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Could it have been a trick of the light? Maybe a shadow cast by the trees outside? But no. The figure in the doorway had been too distinct, too real. There was no denying it. Someone had been in the cabin, and they had been watching me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't alone. Not now, not ever. I didn't know what to do next. The footage was clear, but who could I tell? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and my phone had no signal. I was trapped. And what if the person had been watching me all along? What if they were still here, somewhere in the cabin, waiting for the right moment to show themselves? The fear that had been building for days now surged to an unbearable level. I didn't feel safe anymore. I didn't feel like this place was mine. It felt like someone else's home, someone who had been here far longer than I had. After seeing the footage, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. Every little sound, every shift in the air made me jump. I couldn't relax, couldn't focus. Even when I tried to go outside for some fresh air, the silence was deafening. The mountains that had once seemed so peaceful now felt isolating, suffocating. I was starting to question whether I had made a huge mistake by coming here. I spent the next day trying to keep busy, hoping the distraction would calm my nerves. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was right behind me. The creeping anxiety made it hard to focus on anything. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, peering out windows, and double-checking the locks on the doors. But nothing seemed to change. I was still alone, but it didn't feel like it. That evening, I decided to take more drastic action. I locked myself in the bedroom, pulled the heavy curtains shut, and placed furniture in front of the door. I told myself it was just a precaution, a way to help me feel safe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to fix anything. The fear that gripped me wasn't something a locked door could solve. I needed answers. I needed to know who, or what, had been sneaking around my cabin watching me. I spent hours sitting on the edge of the bed, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it someone local? A hunter, maybe, who had somehow gotten too close to my cabin? Or was it something more sinister? The thought that I might not be alone, not in any way that I understood, sent chills down my spine. The footage had shown someone in the doorway, but it hadn't told me why they were there or what they wanted. I felt like I was on the edge of something much darker, something I wasn't prepared for. At some point, I fell asleep, exhausted from the mental strain. But the sleep was restless, filled with dreams that were just as unnerving as everything happening in the waking world. I couldn't remember all the details when I woke up, but the feeling of dread lingered. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, hoping to hear something, anything, to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. But all I heard was the oppressive silence of the cabin. When I finally gathered the courage to leave the room, the first thing I noticed was the odd smell in the air. It was faint, almost like old wood mixed with something metallic. My stomach churned as I walked through the cabin, trying to identify the source of the scent. I didn't want to believe it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized the smell was strongest near the door that led to the basement. I had never gone into the basement. It was locked when I arrived, and I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now, with the smell lingering in the air, I couldn't shake the feeling that it held something important. Something I wasn't supposed to find. My gut told me that whatever was going on here, it was connected to that basement. As much as I hated the idea of going down there, I knew I had no choice. I had to know what was hidden beneath the cabin. But when I approached the basement door, I hesitated. It was as if the cabin itself was warning me to stay away. The air around me grew colder, and the silence felt thicker, heavier, as if the entire place was holding its breath. With trembling hands, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness below. The smell grew stronger the farther I went down. My heart pounded in my chest, and every step felt like it took me deeper into something I wasn't ready to face. There was no turning back now. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were damp, and the air felt thick with mildew. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the pile of old, dusty objects stacked in the corner. At first, I thought they were just abandoned furniture or old boxes, but as I looked closer, my stomach dropped. Among the pile of discarded things, I spotted a familiar object, my jacket. The same one I had left hanging by the fireplace a few days ago. How had it gotten down here? Why was it in the basement? I stepped closer to investigate, my mind racing with disbelief. And then I noticed something even worse. A set of footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, leading away from the pile and toward the far corner of the room. I froze. The footprints weren't from boots or shoes. These were barefoot, leaving a clear, wet impression on the dusty floor. My mind went into overdrive, trying to make sense of it. How could someone have been down here without me hearing them? And why had they left traces of themselves in the basement, of all places? I couldn't stand there any longer. My breath was shallow, and my heart was racing in my chest. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a faint noise, a soft scraping sound behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows, deep and suffocating, stretching across the room. The only light was from the dim bulb above, casting eerie shapes against the walls. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the far end of the basement, just out of the light's reach. But when I blinked, it was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed back up the stairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I slammed the basement door shut behind me, almost tripping in the process. My mind was a chaotic mess of fear and confusion. I had to get out of there, but something told me that running away wouldn't change anything. Whatever had been happening to me in that cabin, it was only getting worse. And I still didn't know who, or what, was behind it. When I made it back to the living room, I saw something that sent an icy chill down my spine. The envelope. The same envelope from days ago, the one with the simple message, "You're not alone." It was sitting on the table in front of me, as if it had been placed there just moments before. I hadn't seen it when I left for the basement, and I certainly hadn't brought it in with me. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my mind screaming at me to stop, to just leave it alone. But I couldn't. I had to know if it held anything new, anything that could explain what was happening. I opened the envelope slowly, almost afraid to find another message inside. When I unfolded the paper, there was a single word written on it. Tonight. That was all. Just the word tonight. My pulse quickened, and I felt the world around me spin. What did it mean? What was going to happen tonight? I stared at the paper, unable to look away, as if it held some kind of answer, some kind of explanation that would make everything make sense. But it didn't. It only made things worse. I ran my hands through my hair in frustration. My mind was spinning. Was this a warning? A threat? Or was it just another sick joke? I didn't know who to trust anymore, or what was real. The tension in the cabin felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. And whatever it was going to happen tonight. I needed a plan, a way to defend myself, but everything I thought of seemed useless. What could I do against someone, or something, that could move around unseen, leaving no trace behind? The realization hit me hard. I had no control here. I was completely at the mercy of whatever was watching me, and it seemed like there was no escape. As the night fell, the air in the cabin grew heavier. The wind outside howled against the wooden walls, but it did little to drown out the pounding of my heart in my chest. Every creak and groan of the old house made my nerves twitch. I couldn't stop pacing, couldn't stop thinking that something was about to happen. The message, tonight, kept echoing in my mind like a broken record. I tried to reassure myself, telling myself that I was overreacting, that it was just the stress getting to me. But deep down I knew better. There was something in that house, something I couldn't explain. I kept glancing at the clock, every tick of the second hand sending a wave of dread through me. The night seemed endless, as if time itself was stretching out, mocking me. I wanted to leave, to run, but I couldn't. The thought of stepping outside into the unknown terrified me even more than staying inside. I sat down on the couch, trying to focus on anything but the growing unease inside me. That's when I noticed it, again. The envelope. It was on the table just like before. But this time it was different. There was a faint smear of something on the corner of the paper. Something red. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I didn't want to open it, but the fear of not knowing was worse than anything else. I grabbed the envelope, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The blood, or whatever it was, had dried, leaving a small stain on the paper. I pulled out the message inside, and for the first time, I felt my stomach drop. The words were different now. Come find me. The message was clear. Whoever, or whatever, was here wanted me to search for them. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me again. Every shadow in the room seemed to move, and every creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps, like someone was getting closer. I had to act. I grabbed the camera I had set up earlier, deciding to use it again, hoping that somehow this would give me some answers. The lens of the camera clicked on, and I placed it in the corner of the room, facing the hallway that led to the bedrooms. My heart pounded as I watched the feed on my phone, waiting for anything unusual. The night seemed still. Too still. Minutes passed without incident, but I could sense it, the quiet before the storm. I glanced at the clock again. 3 a.m. It was the witching hour. Suddenly, I saw movement on the screen. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, a trick of the light. But no. There, in the doorway of the bedroom, I saw a figure. It was faint, almost transparent, but unmistakable. A shape standing motionless in the dark, just staring at the camera. And then, without warning, it moved slowly, deliberately, towards the living room. I froze. My blood ran cold. I turned to look at the hallway, but there was no one there. Not a sound. Just the deafening silence that seemed to suffocate me. I turned back to the camera feed, watching in horror as the figure grew clearer. It wasn't just any figure. It was me. I was standing in the doorway, watching myself sleep. But I hadn't moved. I had been sitting here the whole time. In a blind panic, I bolted to the bedroom, my legs barely carrying me as I ran. The house felt enormous now, like it was swallowing me whole. But when I reached the bedroom, it was empty. No one was there. Not a trace. It was as if nothing had ever happened. The figure, the footsteps, the messages, all of it had vanished. I collapsed onto the bed, gasping for breath, my mind reeling from the impossibility of it all. I don't know what happened that night, or if it even happened at all. The footage from the camera was gone the next morning. Everything was as it had been when I arrived. The cabin was still, silent, and somehow normal. But I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is still watching me. I left the next day, drove for hours, and never looked back. But I don't think I'll ever be able to forget what I saw. And I certainly don't think I'll ever truly feel alone again.